Hello, dear comrades. Today we continue the series of lectures on the concept of public safety, dead water, and the subjects of today's discussion. The topic will be about the concentration of control that occurs in supersystems. In the introductory lecture, the overview lecture, we already discussed that the process of concentration of control over the productive forces of humanity has occurred both at the regional level and at the global level. An example: the concentration of control over productive forces at the regional level is our country, the USSR Russia. You remember from history that first there was the Moscow Principality, and then the lands were added through the efforts of the Cossacks. The unification of peoples occurred. Yermak Timofeyevich, Dezhnev, and so on, annexed lands to the Moscow Principality. But a similar process was taking place at the global level, and the first to approach this issue with awareness were the ancient Egyptian priesthood, and it developed a strategy for conducting globalization. We talked about this in very general terms. And now, after we have examined the processes occurring in supersystems, we can take a deeper look at this process, how it occurred, what its cause is. And we mentioned in the introductory lecture that this process is objective, meaning it does not depend on our desires, whether we like it or not. It was happening. What is its objectivity? It is that on planet Earth, countries and peoples initially lived separately from each other, and their influence. The influence on each other was minimal, but as soon as they began to interact with each other, which included the development of transportation means, mobility, and so on, as soon as they interacted, the more powerful system or part of the supersystem inevitably subordinated the weaker ones. Well, an example of such influences can be taken from trade. For example, I have better wheat, and I brought wheat to your market and began to influence trade and subordinated that trade to myself. One can also go by force through war to take, conquer, and incorporate elements of the supersystem, thus subordinating them to one's will, interests, and goals. Thus one can implant religion into the consciousness of neighboring peoples and countries, thereby locking them into solving the tasks set by the leadership of that country. One can marry a prince and a princess, thus uniting the kingdoms. This has objectively occurred in history, and from a scientific perspective, it is a process occurring in the supersystem. It is a process of concentration and centralization of control over productive forces. And this should be viewed through the vector of management goals, through the complete management function. Here in the picture we remember that supersystems, called supersystems, consist of elements that possess memory, based on which they can self-manage. These elements can manage other elements by transmitting informational influences, that is, by controlling them. They themselves are subject to management by other elements because they are influenced by information from other elements. Remember that little diagram where all of this is illustrated. And if we overlay this diagram onto human society, what happened? It means that if someone has more powerful information and he consciously applies it, he sets the vector of goals in relation to other elements. He influences with this information of various kinds, which includes achieving certain goals. Remember the structural and unstructured methods of management. When information is thrown at many elements, they begin to do what I need. Therefore, this process can be indicated schematically here like this. First, this element influenced the nearest elements and connected them, subordinating them to its will. Then, having penetrated and made them do what he needed, these elements themselves performed the assigned tasks in relation to others. That is, they were integrated into the vector of goals of the one who started this concentration process, and so on. In other words, the area expanded. Here, you see a step-by-step phased connection of elements subordinating them to the task set by the initial element. If we now transfer this picture to planet Earth, then on a global level, it originated in ancient Egypt, creating a specific army, hiding in one of the tribes. Levi became Levites, information spread, subjugation of countries and peoples, a totalitarian pyramid, remember? And now, whether we want it or not, whether we like it or not, this globalization is essentially complete. But since the vector of goals contain principles such as divide, incite conflict, and dominate, this vector of goals did not align with the vector of the hierarchically higher. Comprehensive management, all of this has now come into conflict with the hierarchically higher comprehensive management. Naturally, a multitude of problems arose which we discussed. So, in the concept of public safety, the force that has exercised control for many years is referred to as the global predictor, according to the biblical concept. Why is it called the global predictor? Well, global is the word because it claims global management on planet Earth, and a predictor is a forecaster, that is, one that sets the goals, for which all other elements of the supersystem should work. In other words, all of humanity. But it must be said that at present the global predictor, that name which I pronounce the global predictor, no longer fully applies. Why? Because over the years of its rule, the global predictor has lost its functions as a forecaster. In fact, it has turned into a controller. If earlier the ancient Egyptian priesthood set the goals, and if earlier it oriented the behavior of many people, directing the efforts of kings and rulers towards achieving certain goals, now this function has been completely lost, and in fact, what is called the global predictor now performs the function of a controller. So, those who want to learn more about this phenomenon can read the novel by Hermann Hesse. One can read Hermann Hesse's novel The Glass Bead Game. In this novel, Hermann Hesse describes how control is maintained at our current stage, what the global predictor is, and how it operates. That is, having lost the ability to implement its intentions towards all of humanity, this global mafia, which originated in ancient Egypt, has created a sort of head of Professor Dowell. That is, they can no longer assess the situation and develop any solutions. And Hermann Hesse describes the abstract country of Castalia, which you can consider as Switzerland with a lake, where there is Lake Geneva, in the center of Europe, and they created a monastery where they educate boys, and these boys are trained in such a way that they are capable of developing new informational modules, which we discussed when talking about intelligence. And the game of beads consisted of the task where, after listening to musical compositions, they had to express that musical piece with a kind of modern color music made from colored threads of beads. And the one who did this best would win a prize. Then essentially, in order to form an analog like this of the light of modern music, but this is a static analogy, that is, there was a cube, and in this cube they hung these threads of colored beads. Literary works were superimposed on the music, and on the literary works there was some historical description of events, and it was no longer necessary to create this, so to speak, cube from colored beads, but rather to present some kind of report. That is what is being discussed. The task was to summarize certain general information from various fields of human activity in a generalized form, and to present, as it was directly called, a report on the work done. And what is most important is to act based on the multitude of emerging factors. Therefore, the global predictor is now working with an artificial head. That is, they do not think for themselves, but use the achievements of scientists. Therefore, the scheme that we are looking at now look at how it looks. At the top of this pyramid is the apex. Well, it used to be the 22nd, Hierophant, the occult world government. So, they have under their control a hereditary, supranational corporation of clan financial families, the so-called Priory of Sion, which divided the entire planet into provinces. Further, below them is a supranational, transnational, unified leadership. It is based on millionaire conferences. They have an executive committee. This is the so-called VSO-EADI system. In general, the data presented in this scheme has been collected from very numerous sources, which are now... In our country, there are very many. This includes Masonic lodges, various secret organizations, and so on, including publications from the Soviet period. And I even watched a film for official use by the special services, where all of this was described, that is, how it functions. Below. All these organizations are located within this pyramid. Organizations of the United Nations, transnational banks, parties, unions, organizations, Masonic lodges, Zionist organizations, and down below, under this pyramid, people do not see all that is above. They only see the signs, meant for the crowd. They see these Masonic lodges, thus the transnational banks, corporations, and the global predator that exercises control say, here they are, the Masons are to blame for everything. And what is located above? The supranational, transnational, unified leadership, hereditary state corporate clans. Ordinary people do not see, do not understand, and blame everything on Zionists. Beat the Jews, save Russia, the Masons are to blame for everything, but in reality they are just a tool based on this system. So, the trick of this global mafia is that they present a fiction to the crowd, while they themselves hide behind these signs. The crowd does not see the true culprits of what is happening, but only fights with the signs, and as a result, they achieve nothing. But the famous names that are so notorious are also represented here. You can see them on the diagram. These are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Montefiore's, Mendels, DuPonts, Oppenheimers, Sterns, Coins, Sosans, Warburgs, Goldschmidts, and so on. Well, you can read about them all. According to various sources, about 350 clan financial families of the world are part of this supranational hereditary supranational corporation of clan financial families, and they implement their plans through millionaire conferences. They have an executive committee, and then there is the WSO, EAD-VEC. What is that? WSO is the World Zionist Organization, founded in 1897, EAD, or as it is also called, is Sashnut. This is the Jewish Agency for Israel, founded in 1929, and WJC, the World Jewish Congress, was founded in 1936, supposedly as an alternative to the WSO. But in reality, all of this is under a single leadership, just with different names. And in principle, the management of social processes is implemented through Judaism. That is, here too, Jews are made the scapegoats for all troubles, although many names at the top of this supranational corporation of clan financial families are indeed Jewish. But it is important to understand that the global predictor is not just names and physical embodiments, so to speak. The most important thing is that the concept looms over them. That is, the idea, the ideology that probabilistically predetermines their decisions, which was once laid down by the ancient Egyptian priesthood. In other words, they are prisoners of this concept. That is, generally speaking, the global predictor is a connection of both people and ideas, and when we examine how egregores work after this lecture, what an egregore is, it will become clearer that the ordinary consciousness of people who do not understand bioplasmic structures and the power of ideas over people asks where they are sitting, in which cave they have hidden, and how they manage this. And even more so, not knowing what unstructured management is, they conflate statements by politicians, in particular about the existence of a world government. And this does not mean that this world government is sitting somewhere, and they have distributed responsibilities like the Minister of Finance of planet Earth, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Industry. No. They manage in an unstructured way, guided by the ideas that were once formed by the ancient Egyptian priesthood. And when a situation arises, all these people, dozens and 300 families, make decisions as their ancestors did. That is, the knowledge is passed down. And when a situation arises, they set tasks for scientists. Moreover, scientists track all the trends occurring in public life and adapt new currents, including in the scientific world, to their interests. Well, in particular, like this. According to our assessment, they adapted the teachings of Ronald Hubbard, who may not have known about what we are discussing now, on how to make a person's life happy. By drawing cybernetic analogies, the brain's work with computing technology, developed methods to free a person from fear, from suffering. How? To make his work more productive in managerial labor. And those who track this say, this will be useful to us. And by slightly adjusting probably some provisions, they decided to use those people who are guided by this teaching to achieve their goals. That is, there is continuous monitoring of the processes occurring in society. And this pinnacle of power, it is what they need. It supports and implements it in their understanding. And what is unacceptable either bends to their side, or suppresses, or discredits, or is done in some other way. This is basically how it works. This is a global predictor. If we have touched on issues related to Ronald Hubbard, then I must add to what we discussed about types of psyche, such a remark about something else. Where did homosexuality even come from? We are talking about a man is psychologically subordinate to a woman through instincts. Well, this is the nature of man. Therefore, there are grounds to believe that the ancient Egyptian priesthood, which formed the concept of managing social processes in order not to be slaves to women and not to be psychologically subordinate to women, that is, not to live in a matriarchy, lived among themselves, so to speak, man with man. And why now these so-called gay penetrations into all spheres of management structures in the West, and in our country too, same-sex marriages and so on? What are the roots of this phenomenon? And the roots of this phenomenon also lie in deep antiquity. That is, those leaders who understood all these processes in order to emerge from the state of matriarchy and not to be psychologically subordinate to women, and instinct is there. Here is, so to speak, the answer to the question of where, as they say, the legs grow from. But it is true. But it is unnatural to the essence of man. Therefore, it leads to degradation, disrupting the informational state of a person. When such same-sex marriages and so on are generally against the will of the Creator, if it comes to that, in the end, it contradicts the intentions. How then can people reproduce from generation to generation? And when this enters the culture of society and takes hold of people's minds, it leads to the degradation of the super system as a whole. This is how it should be viewed, including at the present moment. Therefore, this scheme of the global predictor is interesting. Here it can be looked at and examined later. That is, who does what and how, what organizations exist. And we will go further. What are the methods and ways of concentrating the management of productive forces. In the concept of public safety, they are summarized into 6 priorities of generalized means of controlling people. A priority is the level of significance, that is, the degree of importance, power of this priority, and they are arranged by power. At the top chose is the most powerful priority, the first one, and then the power decreases, but the speed of action increases. So, the 6th priority is least powerful, but with its help, one can quickly achieve the desired result. And in fact, here, management activities for concentrating the productive forces of humanity were carried out by all these priorities in combination. The only thing that prevailed in one case or another, in one historical event over a period of time, and in fact, all of this was done together. This is being done now as well. Therefore, let's consider these priorities slowly. We'll draw parallels about how this is done now in our modern life, and we will start from the simple to the complex. The simplest priority is the 6th priority, which includes conventional weapons, ordinary means of destruction, means of killing people and material structures. Well, how can one simply conquer? To make the people of another country slaves in that global slave pyramid, which I hope you have all, so to speak, understood. So, power and weapons. How to make a slave work. Point a gun at him and tell him to dig, and he will dig. If he doesn't dig, I can kill him. And, under the threat of death, the slave will do what I need. If you conquer a country, you need to make many people slaves so that this country works for you. When you conquer a country, you place armed people everywhere, patrolling the corners. We have all watched war movies. The country, its people, resources, and wealth work towards the goals set by the invader. But this weapon, as you can see, is not very effective. Why? Because the overseer who stands over the slave who is digging, if he turns away, and we have seen how prisoners in movies escape. They kill the overseer and scatter. If you have conquered a country by force, then people flee to the forests, start guerrilla warfare, and can kill the invaders and so on. That is, this is very unstable. Remember the concept of management stability. That is, the power of weapons. This method does not ensure stable management of processes. Although you can achieve the goal quickly, ensuring stability is difficult. Therefore, a more powerful priority, the 5th priority, is the weapon of genocide. The oldest are alcohol and drugs. That is what is sung in a wise Russian song. You don't need a knife for a drunkard. Just pour him a little and do whatever you want with him. And if we draw parallels with the previous management priority, you don't need to point a gun at a person to make him dig a hole. True, it will take a little more time. You poured him a shot today. Do you want to drink? Here, dear, drink up. I'm treating you. The next day you poured another shot, about 100 or 150 grams of vodka. Do you want to drink? I do. Here. So you fed the person for a month, and after a month he will come with trembling hands and say, "What do you want me to dig up so that—" So, to get a shot, and that's it. He will already work for that shot. You spent a lot of time on getting him drunk, but the result is more stable. He is already, as they say, sitting on that shot or on the needle. So, the most impressive example from human history in this sense is the capture of the Indians in America. We have watched many movies about Chingachgook with you, but few know that there were very few invaders at the very beginning, yet they destroyed an entire civilization of Indians. According to various sources, there were from several dozen to several 100,000 people there, and maybe even 1 million in that civilization. And there were only a few dozen invaders. There weren't enough bullets to kill the Indians. What did they do? They made running moonshine stills from the barrels and rifles, handed them to the tribe leaders, and the Indians, had fun and celebrated. So, as a result, what do we have now? Where are these Chingachgooks? They live in reservations in their own country. If we draw parallels regarding our country, look at what is happening across our land. An outright alcohol nicotine genocide of the people. Women are already drinking in the villages are abandoned, and children in schools are already drinking this proper beer during breaks at 12, 13, 14 years old. It's just terrible.